Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. I hope that you are well. I hope you're having a good weekend even though we haven't got the Formula 1 Grand Prix. We're just edging closer to France next weekend. And of course I will be live for qualifying and the race next weekend. A triple threat, France, Austria, Austria. It's going to be absolutely amazing. But I thought I'd take the opportunity whilst there isn't a race on to look at one of the drivers who's been in the news recently for quite a few different reasons. I am of course talking about Valtteri Bottas. Lots and lots of people discussing him, George Russell, Mercedes, what's going to happen with that seat, when is that switch going to happen, is it going to be the end of the year, is it going to be at Silverstone? I've heard some sort of rumours going around that it might be. So I thought I'd look into his 6 races, his performances so far this season, and whether or not I think that he should be replaced at Mercedes sooner rather than later. So if we just look at the 6 races so far, his qualifying and his finishes. He's got 1 pole position in there in Portugal, 3 third positions, 2 DNFs, and a 12th place finish in Baku. And I think that 12th place finish is really what people are talking about. It's really started the fire of should George Russell take that sort of seat away from Valtteri Bottas. But going through these 6 races, first of all, we have Bahrain. He's finished 3rd place there, and if you're Mercedes, that's what you're expecting from Valtteri Bottas. You're expecting 2nd place, 3rd place, 4th place at the absolute minimum, I think. And when it comes to Valtteri Bottas, actually, if you look at the races that he's been in and has been able to get the car together, that's exactly what he's delivered. And Bahrain was one of those races, right? He was in and amongst Verstappen, could have possibly taken 2nd place, but had a slow pit stop, ended up with a podium. That's a pretty good finish from Bottas, and Mercedes were more than happy with that kind of finish. You know, I think we're at this point now where we realise Mercedes see Hamilton as the champion and Bottas as a secondary driver that needs to get the points to keep them in the Constructors' Championship. Then we moved on, obviously, after that podium in Bahrain to Imola. And in Imola, he was just really, really slow. He just couldn't quite seem to get the tyres together. I think we saw, especially with the weather conditions, it just completely ruined any possibility of him getting further up the field. He just couldn't really seem to get the car to work in the wet. And then obviously, he's in and amongst this sort of 8th, 9th place. He's battling with George Russell. And then we have the incident with him and George Russell. And personally, I think this was fairly in the court of George Russell being at blame for this. I think Valtteri Bottas didn't do too much wrong and sort of got caught up as George obviously dipped his tyre onto the wet grass. But he moved on from this, and I think, you know, in Imola, he'd probably picked up a few points, but Mercedes would have been slightly disappointed. So he came back, Portugal, and was electric. Portugal, pole position. Can't fight that at all. And then converted that pole position into another 3rd place finish. You know, Hamilton and Verstappen this season have just been incredible. Obviously, neither of them finished in Baku, but apart from that, Hamilton and Verstappen have looked incredibly, incredibly good. And, you know, you can sort of get behind Valtteri Bottas finishing in 3rd place again, even though he started from pole. Was he going to be able to keep Verstappen and Hamilton behind? They are just so much better drivers, in my opinion, that a 3rd place finish was another really good finish. And in terms of, if you're looking at this from a Mercedes point of view, it's a great finish for Valtteri Bottas. He's got that 3rd place. He's behind the 2 best drivers on the grid. I don't really know what more you can ask for him. And the same in Spain, really. When it got to the Spanish Grand Prix, he got that podium, he came in 3rd place. And again, I don't really know what more they're expecting from him. If they're expecting to win a few races over the course of this season, I could understand that. But I think as long as he is consistently, as I said, in 2nd, 3rd or 4th, Mercedes are picking up those points. They'll be fairly happy with his consistency. I think the only issue comes in is when we get to Monaco and Azerbaijan. And in Formula 1, we move on very, very quickly. You're only as good as your last race. I've got people talking about Vettel being resurgent after one good race in Baku. Actually, he did have a good race in Monaco as well. But you know what I mean. You're only as good as your last race. If you had an incredible Baku, people are talking about you. If you had an awful Baku, people are talking about you. And I think this is why the start of the Valtteri Bottas talk has come in. Let's be honest. In Monaco, Valtteri Bottas looked better than Hamilton. I'm more than happy to say that. I think Valtteri Bottas in Monaco was a better driver than Lewis Hamilton. I think he was probably better than other 18 drivers on the grid, because I think he should have probably got second place behind Max Verstappen. It was not his fault that even though he had the pace, he was in front of the Ferraris, in front of the McLarens, as you can see there. His pit stop is not his fault, in my opinion. His pit stop, that's got to go down as some of the engineering, or possibly a mistake by the pit crew themselves. I don't think you can blame Valtteri Bottas for this in the same way that Toto Wolff sort of came out and maybe started to point towards Valtteri Bottas as being at fault. He's like 2 or 3 inches away from where he should be. That is exceptionally good for a driver that is, traveling at ridiculous velocities, even in the pit lane. And I think he did really, really well in Monaco. Showed that he was better than Hamilton on the same track. Showed that he was able to get the tyres working when Hamilton wasn't. And the pit stop going wrong, I don't think can really be blamed at his fault. But the issue is he didn't pick up any points in Monaco. So then when you look at the Constructors and the Drivers' Championship, because he didn't pick up those points, he looks very, very far away from everybody else. Now, of course, we move on to Azerbaijan. And Bottas has some of these races in him. I'm thinking of that Turkey race where he just didn't show up. I think Mercedes know that Valtteri Bottas 2 or 3 times a season just won't show up to the race. And unfortunately, Azerbaijan was one of those. Qualifying, he just got completely wrong. There was that incident in Q3 where he was trying to get Charles Leclerc to move in front of him because he'd completely messed up where he was coming out onto the track. Is that Mercedes' fault? Possibly, his race engineer is telling him when to go out onto the track. Is he going to get a slipstream down the straight? Actually, Hamilton came out later and therefore couldn't give him a slipstream, and it was all a bit strange in that qualifying. It looked like Valtteri Bottas just didn't have the confidence in the car, didn't have the confidence in the team to actually deliver him a good enough strategy in the qualifying to get him anywhere close. And then there's lots of stories coming out at the moment with Valtteri Bottas saying that he chose the different wing setup to Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis Hamilton in Baku, let's be honest, from the restart, I thought Lewis Hamilton was going to win the race. I figured that, 3 laps, him versus Perez, a standing start, getting into the turn 1. And honestly, if Hamilton's brakes would have been set correctly, I think he was ahead of Perez into turn 1. Obviously, we had the magic brakes. And he pushed all of the brake balance to the front wheels and just drove off the track and ruined his ability to win that race. But I think Hamilton would have won that race. And then you're looking at Valtteri Bottas not even being in the points. And I think that is down to that wing choice. He decided to opt for something different to Hamilton, tried to go a different strategy, and it just didn't really work out for him. And he looked very, very dejected at the end of the race, and he looked dejected whilst the red flag was happening, to be honest. I don't think in himself he thought, right, there's a red flag here, everybody's going to be crumpled back, let's see how much I can jump into the points. Like, you saw Alonso from the red flag start gaining 4 places. Valtteri Bottas should be doing something along those lines. He should have seen that as an opportunity to jump back into the points, but just didn't take it. And looking at his season so far, that is sort of the general gist of what I've seen, is that he just hasn't taken those opportunities when they've come around to him. And don't get me wrong, we're looking at a driver here who is incredibly, incredibly experienced. But when you look at the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship, this is where those questions start to come in. He's dropped points at Monaco, he's dropped points at Azerbaijan, and obviously lost out a couple of points in Imola. Whether they'd get him close enough to Leclerc or Norris, very much debatable. But if you're looking at Norris and Leclerc losing some of their points because Valtteri is going to finish in front of them in Monaco, in Azerbaijan, then he's in and amongst that Perez sort of role. And Mercedes, when they're looking at Valtteri Bottas, I think for the rest of the season, they're looking at, can he gain enough points on Perez to put Mercedes back within the Constructors? So you can see there, Red Bull 174 points and Mercedes 148. Yes, they're miles ahead of Ferrari. I don't think Ferrari or McLaren are going to catch up to either of those two. They've set themselves out. They've set that stall out as being the number 1 and number 2 teams. But can Valtteri Bottas pick up enough points to help Lewis Hamilton along the way and also keep Perez's points to a minimum so that they can sort of balance each other out? Because if Valtteri Bottas and Perez obviously get a very similar amount of points, we're looking at the difference between Hamilton and Verstappen as to whether who's going to win this Constructors title. And Perez is going from strength to strength to strength, whereas it looks like Valtteri Bottas has just lost a little bit of emphasis. He's lost a little bit of that drive in the car. And I feel really sorry for him. Do I think that Mercedes are going to replace him in the middle of the season? No. And mainly because looking at his stats there, he is an incredibly consistent driver. We're looking at 163 Grand Prix entered. And you've got to remember, some of those were in the Williams car. And he looked incredibly good in that Williams. That's why he got the move to the Mercedes in the first place. 59 podiums. That is very, very consistent. And even this season so far, he has been very, very consistent. 3 podiums out of 6 races is nothing to sort of shy away from. That is an incredibly good return from Valtteri Bottas. It's just not what people were expecting. And if he can get a 3rd place or another podium in France, another podium in Austria, I think we're looking at this completely differently. Do I think these 3 races, this triple header, is important for Valtteri Bottas? That's what I want to know in the comments down below. Let's say Valtteri Bottas gets 3 podiums in these next 3 races. I think he's guaranteed to stay at Mercedes for the long haul and until the end of the season, especially because Mercedes don't want to change too much whilst they're in this really dogged fight with Red Bull. How bad does it have to get in these next 3 races for them to really seriously consider George Russell moving into Silverstone? I think if he finishes outside of the points in 2 of those 3 races, then we're really looking at something that I don't think we've seen before from Valtteri Bottas, where he has just completely lost it. You know, lots of people saying that Valtteri Bottas was never as good as Hamilton, was never really going to put him up for a title challenge in the same way that Rosberg did. I completely agree with that. But do I think Valtteri Bottas is good enough to be a secondary driver to a champion? Yes, he's shown that over the last 4 seasons. He has been imperious behind Lewis Hamilton, consistent podiums, picking up points and making sure that Mercedes win that Constructors' Championship. But I'd love to know, what do you think in the comments down below? How bad does it need to get for Valtteri for him to be replaced? And honestly, in my opinion, this season so far for Valtteri hasn't been too bad. You know, the 2 DNFs, I would say, aren't really his fault. The only one he's really been at fault for is Baku. Imola, he'd have picked up points. Monaco, he'd have probably been on the podium. You know, we're looking at 4 podiums instead of 3 podiums. We're looking at 5 points finishes out of 6 races. Thing is not too bad. It's those DNFs that have really sort of put a smirk on the season for him. They've smudged a little bit of the edges, and now those questions are starting to come in. But as I said, I'd love to know what you think down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. We're edging towards 1,000 subscribers. That is my next goal on the channel. If you have enjoyed this video, please subscribe, leave a like, and thank you again for watching. I will see you next time.